The Trap Set will always be available for free, but we rely on donations from our listeners. Please visit our website at thetrapset.net and click Donate. Subscribe to our show on iTunes, and if you enjoy what you hear, give us a review.
This is Joe Wong. Welcome to The Trap Set, where each week we explore the lives of drummers. I want to play something for you. You're hearing Fast City by Weather Report, featuring my guest, Peter Erskine on drums. Erskine began his career with the legendary Stan Kenton, and his playing took on new dimensions when he joined Joe Zawinul, Wayne Shorter, and Jaco Pastorius in Weather Report. Peter's musical flexibility and adventurous spirit propelled the supergroup through exciting new terrain. It didn't hurt that he could swing. Erskine has worked with dozens of iconic artists, ranging from Joni Mitchell to Joe Henderson. He's also a renowned professor at USC, and as an incredibly prolific bandleader, has released over 20 albums under his own name. And now our conversation with Peter Erskine.
Anyone I know who's a successful musician, he or she is a successful musician because they're passionate about music. I mean, they love it. They couldn't imagine themselves doing anything else.
When did you have that realization in your life?
I think when I was 6 years old. I mean,
can you remember a particular moment where it crystallized?
One moment in particular, I had mentioned Broadway shows. I was 6 years old, and my parents took me up to New York City to see a show. It was called, I was 6 or 7. The show was called Subways Are for Sleeping, a Broadway musical, and there was an orchestra in the pit. And I remember walking down to the edge of the pit and looking down into the pit and seeing the musicians. And then when they started to play, it was so thrilling, and I thought, I said, this is what I want to do. And when I would buy the albums, and LPs generally came with photos from sessions, and you'd see the musicians in the studio or on stage if it was a recording of a live concert. And I wanted to be that drummer in that photo.
What did your parents do?
My father was a physician. He was a psychiatrist by the time I came along.
Uh-oh.
Very wise man. He had been a bass player in high school and college, and that helped. He paid his way through medical school by doing gigs.
What kind of gigs did he do? Did your father do, like as a bassist?
Well, he had his own band for a while. It was called Fred Erskine and his Music for Moderns. Jazz. And jazz was kind of the pop music of the day back then, in the 40s, 30s and 40s, and he did some playing after the Second World War, but by then he was a Navy medical officer for a while, and so he started his private practice eventually, and so medicine kept him very busy. But there was music in the house. I had an older brother and 2 sisters, and while we all had the same opportunity to hear music in the house, I was the one that took to it so much, and so this, of course, delighted and intrigued my father. So he put that much more focus and energy into my becoming the musician in the family.
A healthy amount of focus?
Yeah, I think so. I wanted to do it. I wound up taking, piano lessons, and I took xylophone lessons, and I took trumpet lessons, and there's always a little bit of risk of being pushed a little too much. I would be asked to play for friends or relatives when they would come over, and I remember in high school.
That's called a return on investment, right?
I guess so. I went on strike. I said, Dad, no, I'm not. I'm not going to perform just because Uncle Jim comes over. And he was a little shocked by that. I can only be grateful for the tutelage I got. I mean, my folks not only would drive me all over New Jersey for lessons, but every summer, beginning when I just turned 7, began this annual trek halfway across the country so I could go to these summer jazz camps. So in 1961, I went to my first camp. It was called the National Stage Band Camp. It was hosted by Stan Kenton and his big band. So you can imagine being 7 years old and standing in front of that every evening for a couple of weeks. Cannonball Adderley was there with his band, so I got to take a drum lesson from Louis Hayes. Some of the prominent early educators who were drummers, men like Clem DeRosa, Charlie Perry, Alan Dawson, they were all teaching at these camps. And the list, just a very small partial list of some of the other young musicians who were there at this camp would include Keith Jarrett, Don Grolnick, Gary Burton, Randy Brecker, Lou Marini Jr., Jim McNeely, David Sanborn. This was where you got your jazz education. Jazz was a dirty word back in the early 60s. You didn't have jazz bands at school. They were called lab bands or stage bands.
Why is that?
Because jazz was a dirty word.
Was it a racist concept behind that, or?
Well, I think so. I mean, if we're going to get into that, America is a nation and a collection of people that has not yet been able to deal with its racist history and a lot of the legacy as a result of slavery. Mm-hmm. And I think there was a racist component. Jazz was also just musically not respected. It wasn't given the same regard or accord as classical music, what so-called long hair. At the same time, if you wanted to get a degree in playing the music of Elvis Presley or the Beatles, you wouldn't have had much success either. So it wasn't purely a racial thing. It was just considered light music.
Right.
Now the plus side to that was that musical training in conservatories was fairly rigorous, and so you got very good training. You would play under conductors who didn't accept mediocrity, and these conductors would let a musician in the band or orchestra know it. Nothing along the lines of the very far out characterization in the film Whiplash.
Sure, you've been pretty outspoken about that.
I like Damien, the director, very much. I've worked with him on his follow-up film.
Right.
And it's a movie. It's Hollywood. But I became outspoken because I was asked, is this realistic? So I answered pretty much along the same lines as if you asked a physicist, is this movie real about somebody surviving for several months on the planet Mars, or the scenes of anti-gravity, whatever. So I just, as an entertainment, like it or not, it's what it is. as a portrayal of drumming or a portrayal of music education, I could only state that in all my experience, I could be a poster child for music education of that particular the era of the 60s and 70s. I never ran into an educator who behaved that way, and indeed, in the now, you can't speak that way at a major institution of higher education. You can't assault a student. When I'm teaching in my studio, if I want to correct a student's grip on the stick, it's my practice and habit to say, is it okay if I touch your hand to show you how to do this? I don't grab a student. I'm very careful because there are rules about all that kind of stuff.
This episode of The Trap Set is brought to you in part by Colectivo Coffee. Handmade coffee since 1993. Check them out online at colectivo.com.
Let's go back to your story. So you're 7 years old, you're at a camp, and Stan Kenton's band is there. Then about 11 years later, you're playing with Stan Kenton. So let's talk about the journey from point A to point B.
It was pretty far out. I mean,
when did you decide that you wanted to play drums?
Well, I was 5, and I asked my father if, I used to play along with recordings, and I do remember asking him if I could find a drum teacher. It only seemed natural because I was going to school, and there were school teachers, and so there has to be a teacher for drumming. So we went to a local music store, and by luck there was a gentleman there who was teaching that evening, and we met with him. His name was Johnny Civera, Civera. And Johnny was a prominent drummer in the Atlantic City area, and he had done some touring with Billy Mays' band and Patty Page, the singer. And he was a house drummer at a place called the 500 Club, where Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis teamed up for the first time, and Sinatra would sing there often. In fact, I'm going back to Atlantic City this summer to do a tribute to the 500 Club and Johnny. So Johnny was this wonderfully patient, swinging drummer who took me on. He had mentioned the summer jazz camp to my mother, and my mother went ahead and sent a telegram to the camp in my teacher's name about this kid drummer in New Jersey. So they contacted Johnny by telephone, and at first he didn't know what they were talking about, but he caught on and then played along with the call and said, yeah, this kid's really great. So my family drove me out to Indiana. Now, this is before the days of the interstate.
Right.
It was a pretty arduous 2-day drive, but I was a kid. It was fun. When we got there and went to the registration or sign-in place, they looked at me and they said, he's too young. The minimum age is 14. And so there was this dilemma. This family had driven 2 days.
That must have been figured into your parents' calculus.
No, I think it was just somebody didn't connect those particular dots. Stan Kenton, however, recognized a good opportunity. So we were told, Stan will audition Peter personally this evening to see if he can stay. Meanwhile, Stan had invited the local newspaper to be there
Right.
also. So I played for him. They took photos. I became a little bit of the face of this jazz camp. And my father, being a physician and a psychiatrist to boot, he became kind of the unofficial psychiatrist for a lot of these musicians who were there teaching, and all were, many of whom were having issues, and they would seek his advice, medical counsel from him. So we kind of became regulars at these summer camps. My parents would take me. The musicians were always happy to see my dad. They were happy to see my sister, or both sisters. I mean, because they were very attractive, and they wound up dating some of these guys. So it was this hilarious kind of family thing, and I was just in heaven, getting to play this music and receive all of this instruction.
Did your other siblings feel like you were getting a disproportionate amount of attention?
Sure, but
they're driving Peter all the way, like 2 days to this jazz camp every summer, and he gets to go to the fun high school.
Well, we all got good educational opportunities. I mean,
Okay.
actually, without going into the whole family history, of course they did, but they were all the more to their credit that they were all very loving and supportive, and they knew that this was Peter's the musician in the family. But my parents were very strong advocates for education, and so we all got a good education. Anyway, going away to high school, you kind of learn to be your own. When I said I was a jerk, I mean, it's just, when you're young, you say stupid shit. I just still remember some of the stupid shit I said.
Like what?
Just stupid shit.
You really don't want to tell me.
So, the thing I learned in working with let's say, some of these band directors or an orchestra conductor like we had there. Nicholas Harshani was his name. He was a great orchestra conductor. A man who didn't suffer fools. And he was demanding. He wasn't nasty. He was just demanding. And I found that I was often working with people who could be loving and could be fun, but who were demanding. They're very demanding. And the thing I learned pretty quickly was that, when you're working with better musicians or under someone who's demanding, they know more about this stuff than you do. And that the best way to take it is not to personalize any instruction, direction, criticism.
And you learned that quickly?
Yeah, I learned that pretty early on.
So you must have been somewhat mature. I mean, if you had that realization when you were 14.
Yeah, I think. I mean, my father used to tell me when I was young, not everyone's going to love you or like you.
Right.
We all try to tell our kids stuff like that. But working under these, band leaders or conductors who were tough, I realized that stuff gets said in the musical trenches when you're going into battle. You're wrestling with music, or however you want to put it. You can't personalize it because it has nothing to do with who you are as a human being. And this was something I learned from Gaber when I was 12 years old. You can make a mistake; it's okay. I mean, if making mistakes, were illegal, I'd be in Sing Sing by now. I've made incredible musical mistakes, and we all do, and that's just the nature of it. I'll usually just try to take a deep breath, maybe have a private chuckle about it, and say, "All right, see if you can do a little bit better."
When Charlie speaks of Lester, you know someone great has come. The sweet.
What do your children do?
Our son is a professional video editor, and he works here in town in Hollywood, and our daughter is a professional actress. I said professional. I'm trying to pull through names. I'm proud of that. She's filming a TV series right now called Heartbeat that's going to premiere on NBC in March, late March, based on a real-life heart transplant surgeon named Dr. Kathy Maliato, one of the first or most prominent female heart transplant surgeons. And my wife is from Japan, so our daughter has a
How did you meet your wife?
My daughter, I'll just get there in a second. My daughter gets all her good looks from her mother. So she's playing a Korean nurse. That's Hollywood for you. You know, instead of hiring a Korean actress, now my daughter has to learn Korean phonetically. But she's a wonderful actress. And she, I don't know if you ever saw Man Seeking Woman, that TV show. She was in the first season of that. And in the very first season at Amazon was doing TV. She was in a show called Betas.
Yeah, I had some friends that were involved with that.
And with Betas?
Yeah.
Yeah, she played Maggie. She was the the girl in the software company, the chick in the software company. I met my wife during the very first tour I made with Weather Report, which turned out to be the third time I was in Japan. So this was 1978. Weather Report pretty much hired me to play the tour of Japan, and they were going to see how that went. By the end of that tour, I was asked to join the band permanently. And Mutsi, her Japanese name, Mutsuko, was one of the interpreters with the crew. And we all really liked her, and I liked her more than anyone else. I bought her a dozen roses the final day of the concert from a Japanese hotel flower shop, and that's like putting a down payment on a car, you know. Walked up to her and kind of shyly gave them to her, and she just said, "Oh, thanks," and turned and walked away. So I'm scratching my head trying to figure out what went wrong, and it turned out she thought I had found them in the dressing room, that they were flowers from a fan, and was just passing them along, because bands often did that, and only later did she find the note, and then she realized that they'd come from me. So anyway, as fate would have it, 7 years later, I was back in Japan. I mean, I'd gone back to Japan quite a few times, and I used to ask about her.
You did?
Oh, yeah.
So it really left an impression on you.
Oh, very strong one. And then 7 years later, she walked up to me, and I was kind of looking down. I didn't have an iPhone back then, but I was looking down, and she kind of looked up, and she said, "Peter, do you remember me?" And normally that's a question I really dislike, because I just have too much stuff going on in my
you have
head.
too many chicks in your life, man?
No, not chicks, it's people. If someone, comes some drummer, hey, you remember me?
Yeah.
No, and I, looked at her for barely half a second, and I blurted her name out. And I said, "Mutsi." And by the end of that week, this jazz festival up in the mountains of Madarao, Japan, I knew that my life had changed, and we got married. We have 2 wonderful children, and we've lived here in Santa Monica for almost 30 years now. And so I'm feeling very blessed.
At the point that you joined Weather Report, was that kind of the highest profile gig that you'd had?
At that time?
At that
sure,
time?
yeah, of course.
How did that change your life, and how did the dynamic in the band work and evolve over the years?
Well, I was an unlikely choice. I mean, guy that played with Stan Kenton and Maynard Ferguson's big bands, playing in Weather Report. But Jocko had heard me playing with Maynard, and he heard something he liked. And the fact that I had large ensemble experience and I could swing. But I was also I was a strong drummer back then. So it turned out to be an interesting choice, and I think it worked well, And, I mean, I guess it did, because I was in the band longer than any other drummer. Happened to be, again, partly due to that realization that these guys know more about this than I do. So when the going got tough, I wasn't tempted to quit. So I'm gonna, stick around. The dynamic in the band, when I first joined, I was a sideman in my own mind. They needed me to step up to the plate to be an equally contributing, improvising musician. And so the advice that I got from Joe Zawinul, the primary advice I got from him, was to always compose when I play. He also once said, if I ever hear you go dooga 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 around the tom-toms, I'm going to kill you. And one time,
now I'm scouring my memory to hear if you've ever done that.
I was doing a film session
for a surf movie
or something, but I started to go digga 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 dig, and I thought of that, and it fucked me up, and I stopped playing halfway, and I blew the take, and I started laughing. I was like, oh man, I let that get in my head. So, yeah, I mean, Weather Report was a huge door opener. After I joined the band, Jocko got me on the Joni Mitchell Mingus album.
Yes.
She didn't know who I was. I mean, she had come to see the band in rehearsal, and she met me. But Jocko insisted. He said, Joni, I'll play on Mingus, but only on the condition that Peter plays drums.
How was your interaction with Joni?
It was great. I mean, that particular album went by kind of in a whirlwind. We did it in 2 afternoons. She had recorded that music with a number of different rhythm sections, and that was the only time she did it with electric bass, and it just happened to work. And Jocko called up Herbie Hancock, who happened to be home, and he introduced Joni to Herbie and got Herbie to play on the record. And,
right.
So it was a heck of a band.
Do you ever feel like there was a moment where you came into your own and you felt like you had developed your own style, or has it been a constant evolution?
It's constant. I mean, every once in a while I'll hear something that sounds, that sounds familiar, the way somebody's playing, and I think maybe that there was a little bit of influence there. I used to hate it when I would hear somebody play what I could perceive as being something I did, because it would always seem to be the more exaggerated or grotesque elements of things that I was trying to get rid of. And that's true for most musicians I know. There's things that are part of our playing that we realize, get rid of that. Phrasing, concepts and stuff. So, I like the music I'm playing now. I like the musicians I'm working with. I like the way I'm sounding. I got this new instrument. I love the way the drums sound. The Zildjian cymbals are better than ever. This Thomas Starr kid is just, I feel like a kid on Christmas morning. It's really fun.
I'm going to have to call up Tom and see if they want to sponsor this episode after that plug.
I don't know if they... it's a colleague, we were listening to some music, and he said, you weren't playing this happy on the other drums. He said, you just sound happier now when I hear you play.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it, and we need to let you get back to your day.
Yeah.
Peter Erskine, thank you so much for doing this.
Hey, my great pleasure, and thanks everyone for listening. And
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If
If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.